crypto warriors, changing our world day by day. The way of the crypto warriors, can't rely on the bankers, no way.
Hey guys, this is Bix Weir, roadtoroot.com. I want to point out an interview I just did with Sean at SGTReport. He's getting demonetized every which way. And go to YouTube and watch the interview. You can find out all his different places that you can go to join and help out my friend Sean. This interview was literally done 6 years ago by us, and we redid it because the fraud at the DTCC is still out there. It's called this $100 trillion fraud could cost you everything. It's so important that you understand this information. A lot of the Q movement and the woo-woo guys are finally starting to talk about the fraud at the DTCC, the fraud at the exchanges, the rehypothecation of shares, the failure to delivers. I dug into this thing years and years ago and was screaming about it back then. Sean was cool enough to let me come on again and scream about it again. But what I'm going to show you here on my channel is that original interview we did. And all the information, I'd forgotten some of it, but it is so important that we get our hands around the manipulation of markets, how it's done, who it's done by, and why it's done, and how it is covered up by an entity called the DTCC and their secret CEDE Company that holds all the assets that mankind has worked so hard for. So check out this interview that we did years ago and go listen to Sean's new interview at SGTReport. And we can stop these guys if we get the message out there. Send this to everybody you know. This is Bix. Have fun listening to this. An oldie but goodie.
Hey friends, thanks so much for joining us. We couldn't thank you enough for supporting us over at SGTReport and at thelibertymill.com. We have on the line a good friend, an old friend, and somebody who we've interviewed at least a dozen times in the past. It's Bix Weir from roadtoroot.com. Bix, how are you?
I'm doing well, Sean. Thanks for the call.
Thanks for coming on. I want to talk about the conspiracy at the DTCC because Bix was one of the many people featured on America's Book of Secrets, The Secret Underground, and I'm not sure that's even aired yet. Has it, Bix? Did you catch it? Or did it air and you weren't in it?
It aired and they took me out of it. And I just confirmed with my contact there 2 weeks before, and they said, oh my God, it's going to be great. And they pulled my segment. So
okay, but now I want to say something very important here because that is significant that you were pulled from it because I did see the one about precious metals manipulation. I saw Alex Jones in it. I saw Bill Murphy in it. I saw a number of people from our sphere of influence in it, and I saw you in it. So you were in one of these, but you weren't in this latest one about the DTCC, which maybe means you were sharing some very, very critical information that they did not want heard.
Yeah, it's true. That show, it only touches on the things that are already out there in the alternative media, the gold manipulation, all the conspiracies that are already talked about. They don't talk about the ones that have not been revealed yet, and that's what I was doing with the DTCC information was telling them about something that is gigantic, and it's not in the mainstream media yet.
Yeah, and I want to go through these points of the things you covered in that interview that were not broadcast. So let's just start at the very basics. The DTCC, why is it so secretive and why is it so darn important, Bix?
Well, it's the Depository Trust and Clearing Corporation, and it has two functions. One is to clear financial transactions, meaning settle up with the money and the title and the paperwork, and then two, it holds all these documents and title and proof of ownership and trust. So those are the two functions. And with our current system of high-frequency trades going, 1 million trades per second, it's impossible to do. So none of these transactions, not none of them, but a lot of them, over 300 million per day, are never settled.
And that's important for people to remember. When we talk about the big picture of manipulation, when we talk about the fact that there's no more rule of law in the United States, when we talk about the fact that there's no recourse for the little guy, and when we talk about the fact that if you're smart, you may want to get out of this paper system and into tangible assets, this is really at the crux of it. Because one of the questions that you wanted to make sure that they asked and understood the answer to was, how can the DTCC process and clear the billions of high-frequency trades that happen in milliseconds every day? Now let's think about that, you guys. Even with the assistance of computers on the settlement side, how in the world is the paper certificate going to transfer hands from the party that supposedly sold it to the party that supposedly bought it, when there's billions of these trades happening every day. And Bix, you're saying that it's just not possible.
Well, it's not possible, and the way this all came about in the 50s and 60s, they were transferring title with couriers riding around bicycles and transferring money, and they got way behind, and so everything went digital. And the law says within 3 days these trades need to be settled. They've changed the law. They said, well, these companies can net trades, meaning you have a lot of clients. They buy and sell billions every day. All you have to do is close up these net transactions. So it's not even the entire transaction. All they have to do is what's different at the end of the day, and they can't even do that. So with computers, with derivatives, that's how they rig the markets. And these trades, they aren't really, as long as the music keeps playing, and the banks and the brokerage companies and your 401k company can pretend that they're buying these stocks and certificates in your name, then they can keep going, and as long as the system keeps going, nobody has to settle up. But at the end of the day, at some point, it almost happened in 2008, the game has to stop, and they're going to have to claim who owns what, and they really have no idea right now.
Now, we see on a daily basis, Andy Hoffman, you, and others document the manipulation in the market. We see the Dow propaganda average spike when it maybe should be falling. We see the plunge protection team in there working its magic. And now we know quantifiably, which we all knew from Gada's work and your work and others, that the manipulation was real. It was already quantifiable from Zero Hedge's work. We knew what was going on, but now it's absolutely smoking gun proven with this new Barclays revelation, and we know how they were doing it. And again, as I said in the beginning of this interview, if Barclays is doing it, JP Morgan and Blythe Masters and her team are most certainly doing it, as is HSBC, the world's most evil bank by many accounts. They're doing it. So you ask, why are there over 300 million stock trades that occur every day that are never processed or delivered? And Bix, I think that speaks to the crux of this manipulation, because they can literally sell paper or trade paper to manipulate the market in whichever direction they want. And that's just as true for silver and gold as it is for common stocks, correct?
Yeah, that's true. And it actually should be cleared by the DTCC as well. Even the COMEX trades, they've changed all the swaps over to there. Basically, they're saying 99% of all financial transactions are now cleared by the DTCC, and they literally hold title to almost every single stock, bond, bearer bond, mortgage-backed derivative. It's all held at the DTCC.
Now, this is where it gets really crazy, guys. Now, this only gets more and more interesting. I got to tell you, I think this is going to be one of the most interesting conversations we've ever had with Bix. Bix, how many phony and duplicate stock certificates of mining companies do you think there are at the DTCC?
Nobody really knows. Truthfully, because these trades are never cleared, and transfer of title never happens, you place a trade with your brokerage company, and you think, oh, they go out and buy the stock on the open market, take that stock, take title to that stock, and stick it in your account. That is not what happens. They take your money, they'll debit your account in your, it'll look like from your side that you own a share of stock, but actually they take that money and they go gamble it themselves. When people trade in stock, yeah, they'll have to go out and try to find it, and then, they'll sell it for you, that type of thing. But you can tell by the amount of shares traded every day. It's, 5 to 10 days, and every single share ever created by that company trades hands. When you know that in your 401k, you haven't sold that mining company for years, and most people haven't. But what happens is the actual title to that share of stock is never purchased, and it's never sold. It just goes back and back in these high-frequency trades, and every once in a while they need to settle up, but it's very rare.
All right, so here's the big one. Quick question, and then we're going to move on to the really juicy stuff. What is located at 55 Water Street, Bix?
55 Water Street is the address of the DTCC. All the documents, all the physical documents, the paper, the contracts for swaps, the contracts, the physical share certificates, all the everything you can imagine is located in the basement vault of the DTCC. a few years ago, they estimated it at $37 trillion worth of paper documentation that is down there. Now, a lot of it's backed up electronically, which is fine, but it's a lot easier to manipulate electronic data than it is to change the physical certificates and bearer bonds, which are basically bonds with coupons that act as cash. And that's what's was in the basement at 55 Water Street.
All right. Now, let's be clear about this. 55 Water Street in New York City. Also in New York City, we have the New York Fed, and we have J.P. Morgan, and we have rumors of a tunnel connecting J.P. Morgan underground to the New York Fed, where literally they could move gold back and forth if they wanted to. Getting back to the DTCC. So, Bix, what happened to the $36 or $37 trillion worth of paper securities that were submerged underwater during Hurricane Sandy? Guys, remember when Hurricane Sandy rolled in? Conveniently, the basement at the DTCC flooded. What happened to those paper securities, Bix?
Well, nobody really knows. What happened was, obviously, Hurricane Sandy came in and flooded Lower Manhattan. And yes, the area around 55 Water Street was flooded completely. The strange things that happen are, first of all, it should have been watertight. The vault at the Federal Reserve a couple blocks away is watertight. The J.P. Morgan vault is watertight. And, those hold mainly bullion, and you don't have to really worry about water. This place held $37 trillion worth of paper securities. And when this hurricane came in, the DTCC claims that it had flooded completely, and they were trying to pump it out, and they don't know how much damage was done, but not to worry. Okay, case closed, and they were done, and they pretty much stopped making announcements about it. So it takes them about 3 weeks to pump out the water. There's talk of, I think it was Goldman Sachs came out and said, a few billion was lost, and then they changed it that same day to 10 million, and then they changed it that same day to say, we don't think anything was lost.
Bix, let me ask you this now. This is the craziest part, guys. When we imagine the banks in meltdown mode, and we imagine the run on the COMEX, the LBMA being drained, when we know these things are happening, this could be a smoking gun. Certainly, it's some sort of historic false flag that was put in place should they need to go back and reference it in the future to conveniently explain why they don't have all of the securities and swap contracts. So, Bix, here's what I'm driving at. You wanted to cover this issue with the History Channel. Why were all of the gold and silver swap contracts transferred to the vault at 55 Water Street just weeks before it flooded? Now, is that the most convenient thing in the world, or am I just a tinfoil hat-wearing conspiracy nut?
Yes, that's exactly what happened. All the swap contracts were transferred to the DTCC about a month before, and then it floods. And the guy who got put in charge of this vault is Michael Dunn. And Michael Dunn was the guy at the CFTC who fought against setting position limits on silver, and he fought against everything. So then the bankers, he's kicked out of the CFTC, and he goes to the DTCC, and he's put in charge of this vault. And then 6 months after he's put in charge of the vault floods, and all the records are destroyed. Talk about a conspiracy-rich environment. That's it right there.
Okay, so now it gets better, right? So you literally can't make this stuff up, right? If John Grisham wrote it in a novel, people would think it's too implausible, it's too ridiculous, and his novel would be rejected before it was published. All right, so let's just recap. $36 trillion worth of paper securities underwater. All the gold and silver swap contracts transferred to the vault just weeks before it flooded. And then a huge fire erupts in the DTCC vault basement just after all the water was pumped out. Can that even have happened?
It did. 20 people went to the hospital in that fire, and they said it was electronic issues in the basement. It just gets so ridiculous. And here's the coup de grace of all of this. Is the ending of the London fix for silver throws all those swap contracts into massive chaos because they're all settled on the London fix as the benchmark number. So basically the contracts were destroyed, and then to top it all off, they won't be worth anything anyway because the benchmark number that settled all those contracts was the London fix, and the London fix is going away on August 14th.
I mean, it just leaves you breathless, doesn't it? I mean, Bix, I've said this quite a few times in just recent interviews. We're documenting the collapse because everybody thinks, everybody, when you imagine it in your mind, you imagine it as this one dramatic event that will unfold and be reported on, with Brian Williams tonight on NBC News. And that's not the way it's going to happen. It's going to happen in this dominoes-style fashion, which we are now documenting, because this is what collapse looks like. And I mean, you just can't make this stuff up. I mean, the ex-CFTC Commissioner Michael Dunn was put in charge of the DTCC Vault just months after it flooded. And he's the same guy who argued against Dodd-Frank Swap Regulations. I mean, these guys are essentially mafia, man, the way I look at it. And then you ask, why does the DTCC hold legal title to all stocks, corporate and muni bonds, physical bearer bonds, and even derivatives contracts under the nominee name, quote, CEDE Company, end quote? Can you tell us about that? Because that's a mind bender.
Yeah, that gets down to who legally owns everything. A lot of people saying, "Oh, the Fed owns everything," or there's conspiracy guys saying, governments and these rich people own your life even because they own your Social Security number. This is a situation that is admitted to. All title for all securities are held in a central clearinghouse, the DTCC, under the fictitious name of CEDE Company. Ultimately, they are the owners of whatever certificate, stock, bearer bond, mortgage-backed security. All of it is held in the name of CEDE Company. And, it's interesting. You'll see it on stock certificates every once in a while. And the name pops up. They never want to talk about it. But just think about the name, CEDE Company. What does CEDE mean? You're giving up ownership. You're ceding your ownership over to other people. It truly is something that they don't want to talk about. It shows you that not even the banksters own title to all these paper securities that are thrown around in the world. And it's almost all of them. I mean, they're saying they control 99% is held under this name CEDE Company.
It's stunning. I mean, it's just, this wordplay is just endless. I mean, take a look at the fact that the vault basement that was flooded at the DTCC is located at 55 Water Street. I mean, some of this stuff is just, I guess, coincidental, but some of it maybe not. I mean, CEDE Company, you've ceded your rights to your stocks and to your certificates. If the government and the Federal Reserve and the exchanges and the banks don't own the DTCC, Bix, who does? I mean, I guess you just covered that, but we don't know, do we?
That is the gigantic mystery. And it has to do, the truth can probably be found in the legal documentation going from the DTCC to CEDE Company. Of course, we're not privy to that information, but we do know that the stock exchanges, the brokerage houses, all sign over title to the DTCC, and they hold all title in trust. But then they, one step further, go on and put it, sign over legal title to CEDE Company. Yeah, who knows who really owns that? Does it get to the dark cabal and all that? There is some Federal Reserve oversight over the DTCC, but very little, and it's not ownership. So if you think the mystery of who owns the Federal Reserve is the big one, how about who owns CEDE Company, and why do they hold title to every single financial transaction, every single bond, mortgage, you name it, is all in the name of CEDE Company. It gets crazy.
Oh, my goodness. All right. So you say that the DTCC holds legal title to 99% of all mortgages in the world. Yes, folks, even yours. Your payment may go to Bank of America or Wells Fargo. Your payment may go to your local bank, a small bank. But is that true, Bix? DTCC holds legal title to 99% of all mortgages in the world?
Well, here's what happened. All the mortgages are bundled up and sold off into mortgage-backed securities. Those mortgage-backed securities, all the paperwork and all the title is held by the DTCC, who transfers it over to CEDE Company. So that's how they get a hold of your mortgage. And even the banks, all the documentation and all the ownership responsibility is signed over to the DTCC, which is the clearinghouse. And you go through all this stuff, and you're like, oh my God, this is a kind of a secret a company that very few people know about, and it's even a subsidiary of that company. So it's kind of like, yes, it goes to the DTCC, which doesn't like to be in the news at all, and then even past that, it has to go to a shell company called CEDE Company. So it is beyond complicated, and it's the unwinding of this. It's going to get really ugly. And because of the structure, and because all these banks are going to go down with their 10, 15 to 1 leverage, nobody's going to know who owns what. And then CEDE Company will come out of the shadows and say, well, I own it all because it's been signed over to me as the trustee.
Let me ask you this. This was the last question, and I guess you just answered it, but it's so stunning that I think we should flesh this out a little bit further. Your question is this: what are the ramifications of the DTCC and their bankruptcy remote entity CEDE Company owning legal title to 99% of all financial instruments in the world? And before you answer, do we need to revise that and actually say 99% of all financial instruments in the United States? Or is it really the world? Because clearly, the DTCC is not in charge of settling all world economic transactions. What's happening in Asia, they must have their own settlement system. Am I correct, or do I have that wrong?
It's in transition for everything. They're pulling all of Europe into the DTCC. When you look at China and the financial mortgage-backed derivatives that they own, those are all held by the DTCC. Everything is getting funneled into the DTCC, especially with these new Dodd-Frank regulations that requires a settlement, place for the over-the-counter derivatives. Now it requires clearing, and the DTC is, every time you turn around, they're getting a new appointment. Okay, you're in charge of swaps and bullion swaptions. Those are the greatest derivatives ever, bullion-backed swaptions. But everything is funneling into the DTCC. And they even take over other clearinghouses. So it's like a giant black hole. Everything's getting sucked, everything around the world. It's not just the United States. So ultimately, that's the goal of these guys, is to suck everything into the DTCC and have it held by this entity called CEDE Company.
Bix, I used the word stunning earlier in the interview because some of this information is so incredibly stunning. It's shocking in its scope. And it would be almost impossible for a new listener, somebody who has trusted the mainstream media, to join in and listen to this conversation and think that we're not nuts. Somebody who does not understand this language, because literally all of our listeners and you and me, we're speaking a different language. The sheeple people, as we refer to them so often, do not speak this language. And they believe everything coming out of the mainstream media. They believe everything coming out of their government. And they are not equipped to process this information. And for those of us in the know, for those of us who have been paying attention, this truly is the collapse. This is what it looks like, you guys. And so the fact that you can still run out and buy precious metals right now affordably, like $20 silver, is truly stunning when we know that there is a twice daily silver fix, when we know that there is a twice daily gold fix. And now those corrupted enterprises are also coming to an end. Now, Bix, what do you make of the silver fix, which is going to supposedly come to its conclusion and end after 100 years, nearly 100 years, on August 14th? Is it going to make a hill of beans a difference? Because there is no rule of law or justice. So will the manipulation actually end?
Well, it throws a gigantic wrench into the rigging mechanisms that they use, because the silver fix, it's fixed once a day in the morning in London by, I think it's 3, or was fixed once a day in the morning by 3 banksters. And they sit around and they choose what the price is. And truthfully, when you think about it, it's the only price point, the only physical silver benchmark in the world, because there's no other exchange that has a physical component that the LBMA was supposed to. The COMEX is futures and options. So when they say they're closing the London fix, where will we get our price for silver? We'll get it probably from the COMEX, which is futures and options. That's not the physical price. So it's kind of, it throws everything into a washing machine of trouble for the bad guys, especially because every single silver derivative contract that is based off physical silver has language in it that says, settling language, which references specifically the London fix as the benchmark value. And you're talking about billions and billions of silver derivative contracts that now are going to go bad starting August 14th. And Jeffrey Christian is kind of up in arms about this because he's the guy with Robert Rubin back in the 80s who really started the gold and silver derivative complex. And now these contracts are so incredibly complicated, and they talk about bullion and bullion swaptions. It's like an option on swaps for bullion. And they're all based off the London Fix, and now they're going bad. And it's interesting because even the group that set the London Fix, when they announced that they're closing on the 14th, says, we take no responsibility for anything after the August 14th date, and we believe everything needs to be settled up between now and then. So after August 14th, there will be no physical price of silver coming from a physical exchange. And it's really scary for those who deal in derivatives and options and all that, because all these contracts that are based off the benchmark price, the London Fix, now have nothing to go off. And they can't, how do they take it to court when you've got a contract that says you have to pay me X amount because based on this London Fix price, which no longer exists?
You know, I'm going to go off on a bit of a tangent here, but I'm going to tie it back to this German documentary. It aired on the news in Germany, and it was about gold price fixing and manipulation. Koos Jansen brought it to our attention, and I mentioned this earlier. The headline was "Gold Price Fixing Manipulation Goes Mainstream on German TV." And I just want to share a couple of quotes from that, Bix, because the fact of the matter is the rest of the world has already woken up. The rest of the world knows. And this German piece on the gold fix is evidence of that, right? And I'm going to just read a couple quotes. The futures market intended to provide predictability and stability for futures prices is controlled by the following three banks: HSBC, Citibank, and JP Morgan. Their tools, paper gold securities. Then they quote a trader, Thorsten Schulte, who says, quote, "It is possible to simply sell scraps of paper, thereby creating fear, especially among those who possess gold in its physical form, and who then may arrange to sell their metal, eventually resulting in a wave of fear," end quote. And then Dmitry Speck says, quote, "Gold is the opponent of debt-based monies, and in particular, the U.S. dollar," end quote. The fact of the matter is that no matter what happens on August 14th, the rest of the world knows about this Ponzi scheme. And the genie's out of the bottle, and nothing is going to change for the powers that be. It's only going to get worse and worse day by day.
I agree 100%. Although, I would say that I think people weren't ready to stand up against these guys back in 2008 when that crash was happening. I think they're ready to do that now. The next crash will be bigger and stronger and more understandable because we've had 5 years of learning about what happened last time, so that this time when the banks go to Congress for another bailout, there's not a chance in hell that they're going to get it. And that's the too big to fail thing, and that's kind of what will get people off the couch when they see that their 401k and their savings account, their checking account is all going away because of the financial manipulations of these banks. They're going to stand up and say, that's enough of this. We're going to go do something more sane and take these people who have led us into this spot. We're going to take them out, and we're going to take over our country. That's the potential we have now, because there's enough anger and enough understanding going on right now that I think it can happen very easily.
Well, I just want to wrap up by saying that the reason for the alt media existing is to get this type of information out, because you sent out an email blast explaining that you sat down with the producers of America's Book of Secrets, Secret Underground, for 3 hours. You did a 3-hour interview, and at the conclusion of that 3 hours, the entire crew was ready to run to the bank and withdraw their money from this criminal system. Then the information you shared never aired. And so now it's aired here. And Bix, I just think it's an incredible time in which we live right now. We are truly watching the collapse unfold. It's just an incredible time. And I guess I don't know what else to say, but I really appreciate the truth that you've shared here today, man. Thank you.
You're welcome. And I know that there's a few of us out here saying this stuff, but there's a lot of people listening. And a lot of people slowly but surely coming around. And all we have to do is keep talking about it. Talk about the truth, back it up with facts, and we'll get there. It's been a long process, but we will get there. And all this is going to come out when the next crash happens. and the banks go to Congress for a bailout, and Congress says no. That is going to be the point, and we almost hit it in 2008, but that will be the point where we can choose to be free people once again or turn to our government for their help. And I don't think people are in the mood to turn to the government again.
Yeah, and I just want to conclude by saying that I'm not going to beat the horse to death in this interview, at the end of this interview here, about the value of 1 ounce of physical gold or the value of 1 ounce of physical silver. If you've listened to this whole interview and you can't figure that out, then we can't help you. But we are there for you should you want to visit us at SGTReport and thelibertymill.com, and you can read Bix's work on his website. Bix, do you want to tell people about it?
It's roadtoruta.com, and I send out free emails, and if you want to get deeper into it, I have a paid subscriber site, but there's plenty of free stuff that you can find, and it goes back to, the manipulation, who started it, how it started, and how it's been able to hold on for so long and where it's going.
Well, guys, thanks so much, and we hope you had a fantastic holiday weekend and a terrific week ahead. We wish you only the very best. Thanks for taking the time to listen, and my thanks to our friend Bix Weir for taking time out of his day today to share this important information with all of us. Bix, thank you.
Thank you, Sean.